You know that the banjo, the gourd banjo brought by Africans, arrived in Maryland no later than 1740. And for almost 100 years, they were the only ones who played the gourd instrument. Um, in about the 1830s, a few white people began to take an interest in the banjo, like Joel Sweeney, who was from Appomattox, Virginia, and probably learned from neighbor slaves, enslaved folks near him. And a man named Ferguson joined a circus, and Dan Emmett learned to play banjo from him. He was a white man, but he had obviously learned from blacks. The point is, there was no one to learn from except blacks in these 1830 early years. By 1800, there's a painting, the old plantation, of a black musician playing a 4-string banjo. You can definitely see the short string on that. But what's unusual about this, rather than the spike, maybe bamboo or gourd neck, there was, it has a flat fingerboard like we have today, and it had tuning pegs. So those influences probably had arrived in the Caribbean, or as the banjo was getting from southern West Africa, from southern Gambia, through the Caribbean to the southern states. Around 1850, people started manufacturing cheese, and cheese hoops were described in a lot of the early banjo building. And I'm one who called attention to the fact that the cheese hoop may have been significant in that transition from the gourd to open back banjos. And even if you still go into some old country stores, you can see the cheese hoop, and that would make a great banjo. So Sweeney was very proud of his banjo, and by, I think it was 1842, the minstrelsy had begun taking off already. Sweeney became part of it with the Virginia minstrels, and they may have been the first band to have a fiddle and banjo together. And there are other people in that band who had learned to play banjo who claimed that they had actually put the fiddle and banjo together a little bit before that. The first reference known to me of a black fiddler is Accomack, Virginia, 1690, where a black fiddler played for whites to dance. And then all through the 1700s, blacks were the primary dance fiddlers on all the plantations, and they also probably became the first dance callers, as identified in I think it's an 1830 reference to a dance, again in New Orleans. So blacks were tremendously influential through their fiddle playing. The blacks were the primary fiddlers of the 1700s, which is the same time that the Scots-Irish are arriving. So I think they probably got just as excited about it. And actually, black influence upon white fiddle playing predates banjo influence. And so I think that's when it was happening, and you begin to see crooked tunes and syncopated tunes. And so I think there was, just as minstrelsy became very exciting to black and white players at a certain time, I think even before that, it was very exciting for fiddle players.
Either the memory brought over or the instruments themselves brought over, and then, the syncretization of all of that, forming what becomes known as the banjo, the banjar, the banjo, whatever, banza, banza, in the Caribbean, and then being brought with people up to the southern United States, or actually just the United States in general, because people forget that there was there were enslaved people all over, from, I think it was like the first European settler stepped foot on, in North America, and like 20 years later is the first African American. You know what I mean? It's like very, very intertwined all over the place, and that's really important to remember, because the image of, slavery in the Deep South leaves out the Tidewater region, the Mid-Atlantic, and all of those folks that were forming these cultures, these enslaved cultures that then were marched down to the pens in Louisiana, and then over to Texas and to Alabama and Mississippi. So it's a very much a wide cultural thing. So you have African Americans with this native instrument, this truly American instrument, the banjo, and it's a plantation instrument for the first 100 years of its existence, and no white person plays it. Like, people know that's a plantation instrument. And you have this, and you also have Black musicians being trained to play for white dances. So you have these dance masters, coming in, but then, Black musicians pretty quickly become very prized, and so they're going back to the quarters, and they're playing the banjo, and they're doing all this, their music and dance, and then they're going to play for these European dances, and they're playing fiddle, and there's all of these primary sources about, that Dirk could play a strathspey, it's like they're learning Scottish tunes and English tunes and all of whoever owns the plantation, And then, of course, that's going to come back and it's going to mix. And, the first people to play fiddle with a banjo would be African Americans. I mean, that's obvious, It's like they've got the banjo. So, and they've had the fiddle for hundreds of years. They have these, runaway slave posters saying, plays the fiddle, plays the fiddle, plays the fiddle. It's like highly prized. So you have all that coming into being. And then you have this form, this sort of string band form. Of course, there's interactions between whites and blacks, particularly poor whites and blacks, because they're the ones, interacting. Like, the aristocracy is not interested in this, So you've got all this stuff, and you start getting the first white people playing the banjo, these traveling entertainers. Like, those are the ones we know about. I mean, who's to say that there wasn't some white people, like, who weren't entertainers, like, who were you know what I mean? Like, who's to say that? But that's what we know. Is these blackface entertainers start playing the banjo. They make some changes to it, but in form, it's like the stuff they do it doesn't change the basic form of the banjo. There's no adding the fifth string, and it was already there, and all of these sorts of things. And then so blackface entertainers start taking the banjo, and people go nuts. They're like, "What is this thing? This is amazing!" And it becomes this cultural explosion. Like, they travel to Europe and Australia and South Africa, and it's the whole world's first encounter with indigenous American music, even done through white people playing in blackface.
Pastor William Brent chokes back emotion as he enters the sanctuary of a church first founded in 1817, nearly 50 years before the end of slavery.
It was a monumental, and you might say a signal moment in the history of our people, being that there were freed slaves.
In its early years, black worshipers were not allowed to gather on their own to hold services legally. They had to be sponsored by a white church, which meant their meetings were monitored and strictly controlled.
First Baptist Church that assisted, because they had to meet under the watchful eye of a white congregation, and also had to have 2 policemen present during their meetings, and if they met over 2 hours, they would be jailed.
Despite
Hello, everyone. I wanted to take a few minutes today as the Barbershop Harmony Society celebrates the beginning of Black History Month. One of the things I love about the study of history is that we learn about ourselves through studying behaviors, culture, and evolution from the past. Certainly in my 50 plus years of barbershopping, I've learned a lot and continue to learn about our past and about how it informs the present and the future. I was a member for 17 years in this hobby before collectively we recognized and learned that the roots of our music was rooted in African American musical culture. It was in early 1990s when Lynn Abbott, historian and writer, helped us learn about the African American quartets from the 1880s through the 1920s. Since then, we have made many efforts to use this heritage to help propel us from exclusion to inclusion.